Hello, welcome to government. So this is Unit 1, Day 2. This is going to be the very basic information about government and how it kind of leads us into foundations. I do apologize, one, for these being incredibly boring, but also just me not looking at the camera. I get really bored when I'm doing these, much like you probably do when you're watching them. But nevertheless, we're gonna plow on through these and see what, hopefully get something out of them. When you have questions, let me know, either in class or shoot me an email. But here we go. So, answer these two questions. Actually, you don't even need to answer them at all. I'm going to give you the answers to them right now. But what is government? Government is the institution through which a society makes and enforces public policies. As in Politics by Aristotle, he mentions three different types of government: the autocracy of a dictatorship, essentially, an oligarchy, which is ruled by a few, or a democracy ruled by the many. Whatever type of government it is, it's the institution. So however it is, whatever it's classified as, it's still the institution through which society makes and enforces public policies. What are public policies? Those are anything that a government decides to do, any issues they want to tackle, anything that they decide, hey, this needs our attention. And it can range from really anything when you think about it. If I asked you to think of a few, if we were in class, many of you would come up with education, healthcare, defense. All of those are certainly public policies. And what they decide to do. It will be a big issue as they go into the campaign in the coming weeks, as they certainly lay out their platforms or talk about the public policies that each candidate would like to put forth. But what is politics? Politics is the process. So government's the institution. Politics is the process. There's a number of different types of politics. What is government? It has three types of power. In the U.S., we basically break these down into three branches of government. Some governments, dictatorships and such, have these three types of power, but they put them under one person or one entity. In the U.S., it is these three types of power. You have, hopefully you're coming up with the three branches of the government as you're seeing this. You have the legislative branch, which makes laws and public policy. Think Congress. You have your lower house, the House of Representatives, and the upper house, which is your Senate. When you think of them, they're the ones that make laws. They pass these bills that ultimately become laws, and then you need someone to enforce them. And that's the executive branch. The executive branch, the head of the executive branch is the president. What he does in his job is executes, enforces, and carries out those policies. Executive departments are those 15 cabinet level positions, and really any part of the executive branch is responsible for executing, enforcing, and carrying out the laws that were made by the legislative branch. The judicial power, or hopefully you were thinking to yourself as you're going through that judicial branch, is, when you think about that, the Supreme Court. And really any Article I court, the federal courts that are set up, they interpret the laws and policies that have been made by the legislative branch and then enforced by the executive. One, you have to have a population. Without people, you're not really a state at all. You're one person, and you are making, that's anarchy, because you're making your own rules. Second, you need a territory. If you don't have a territory, that means someone else is making your decisions for you. So you have to have your own territory. You must possess sovereignty, and this is the ability to make decisions without any outside interference. So if you're a state, you have to have your own decision-making body and your ability to make your own decisions, and without any outside interference. And when I say states, and I'm sorry if I should have clarified this earlier, it is not like states as in Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. These are nation states, essentially. So sovereignty is the ability to make that decision and do things without any outside interference. In times of imperialism and colonialism and such, those countries that were colonized did not have sovereignty. They were not making their own decisions. So therefore, they didn't have sovereignty. They were not considered to be their own independent states. And then you must have a government. Whatever form, it doesn't have to be a democracy, but whatever form you have, it does have to be a government, and it has to be there to make the decisions. So, 4 characteristics of a state. When we're in the classroom, when we're there, is the classroom a state? Do we have a population? Do we have territory? Do we have sovereignty? And do we have a government? Yes, we have population. You're in there. Any given time, I guess, was, however many students are in there. It's you and then me. I'm in there, and I have rules. So I'm a government. I do make the rules, and they're there, and you have to follow them. But do we have the other two? Do we have a territory? We do have walls. We do have a door. But is it our own? Do we get to make our own decisions without any outside interference coming with sovereignty there? Who has control over the classroom? Who makes the other rules? So no, in short, we're not. We're not. We do have a government. I have rules in place, as we said, as does the school. We do have you. Therefore, we have a population. What are we lacking? We're lacking sovereignty. Who gets to make decisions? We have school rules that we have to follow. And we have rules within the district we have to follow. So we don't have sovereignty. We don't get to make our own decisions. And we certainly don't have territory. Territory is what is known in international law from going up and down, from heavens to the earth, up and down. We do not have that. Obviously, there's a classroom below us, so we don't even have it from up and down. We certainly don't have it because we don't get to make our own rules within these defined borders of a classroom, of these four walls and door. So where does this idea of a state come from? There are 4 theories for the origin of a state. And they'll all make sense when we get to them, but this is basically where they came when they're coming up with this. This is the idea that they had, these ideas that were put forth. One is the force theory. Pretty simple when you think about it. A person or persons forced another group of people to submit to others' rule after claiming control over an area. Essentially, they came up, they take over and say, now I'm in charge. And this is what happened during colonial times. I often think of when I think of the force theory, I think of Genghis Khan. The great Khan comes out, and all of a sudden everybody has to live within his rules. They submit to his rule, and if they do, they generally live pretty peacefully. If they don't, he enforces his will on them, and their life is infinitely worse. But that's the force theory, that basically they come in, they take over, and you live within their rules. You have the evolutionary theory, which is basically that it developed naturally out of a family. One person is seen as the head of the family, and this network of families then form into clans and later tribes. So it starts with 2 people, and those 2 people have babies, and then you form these groups, and it develops naturally. So one person is seen as either the patriarch or the matriarch, is generally in charge, and then it goes down from there. It's the most natural origin of state that we have, and that these groups, and you can think of nomadic tribes that would travel together, kind of developed out of this evolutionary theory. That you started with a small group, and as that group had babies, it expanded and then incorporated more groups, and then you have clans, and again later into tribal governments. And then you have the divine right of kings, that God created the state and gave power to the ruler over a certain territory. And you might think, Mr. Miller, why do you have a dog with a crown? Well, that, my friends, is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. And you might say, again, Mr. Miller, this is very strange. Why do you have this? Well, because King Charles and his infinite wisdom and everything he did, and you can think back to him, and you might remember from your world history days what he believed, and he did believe this because his father before him told him this, that God created the state and you're the ruler because God made it so. And it's true, and then Monty Python says, and he does believe it, he ends up in the Civil War with Oliver Cromwell and all of that, and he does go through this, and he believes this, and you might remember him because Monty Python said it's something like he began his rule at 5 feet 4 inches tall and ended his rule at 4 feet 9 inches tall. Why was that? Well, he lost his head because the divine right of kings didn't hold true for him. He does lay his head on the stump as the executioner's going to swing the axe and take his head off, and he says to him that you're executing your king, and you're doing this against God's will. I have been chosen by God, and I've been given control over this territory. When he's killed, it sends shockwaves through Europe, obviously, because a king was tried, and he was by superior jurisdiction on earth, and it sends the ripple effects that King Charles and all you monarchs are not actually chosen by God, that you rule through the will of the people. But it was certainly an origin theory, and one that ruled for a long time, particularly throughout Europe. And then the social contract theory, that people basically agreed with one another to create a state. By contract, people within a given area agreed to give up to the state as much power as was needed to promote the safety and well-being of all. Who came up with this? A lot of people. You have Locke, Hobbes, Harrington, Rousseau, all discuss in their writings a social contract. How much are you willing to give up? What are you willing to give up? That's a social contract theory. When you think about this, what are you willing to give up when you come into school? Are you willing to give up for the safety and security of others, I should say? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to have the ability for them to take your phone every day and look at that because it creates for the safety? And one would say probably not, because what really does that do? Do I really need to give that up for our safety? Is it proven that if people have access or the administration has access to this, that we're safer? Probably not. But what are you willing to give up for the safety and security of others? A number of things. And we think back to the Patriot Act and when that was passed, what were you willing to give up? What were Americans, you weren't because you weren't alive, but what were Americans willing to give up for the benefit and the safety of others? And that's the social contract theory, and we will talk about this one a whole lot throughout this course. What does a government do? All laid out in the preamble to the Constitution. 6 things here, we the people in the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. One, they knew it wasn't perfect. The founders knew that. The framers knew that. They knew it was going to take some serious work. It's going to establish justice. It's going to ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. But those are the 6 things that government is seeking to do, that is laid out in the preamble. You have the distribution of power in 3 different ways that this happens. You have unitary forms, you have the confederation forms, you might know, and we'll talk about each of these. So unitary. This is a federal centralized government, national government holds the most power. Essentially, when you think about this, you can think of unitary forms of government, and you can think of things like Parliament in the United Kingdom. This is any power that the local government has been given down to it, has been given down to the local entities. So they decentralize this power and they send it down, and you give it down to the local authorities, but it can be taken at any time. So in the UK system, in a system such that they have, it can be taken at any time, and you don't always have it. So think of this, individual U.S. states can have this, but also the better example is a parliamentary system, a unitary system of government, that you can take it, they hold these power, they give it to them, and then you can take it back at any time that it doesn't meet your needs. Confederation, good examples of this are the Confederate States of America. The European Union is sometimes given as an example. And while it's somewhat true and you can make that argument a little bit, it doesn't really hold up completely. But in a confederation, the local governments, these states, provinces, or in the example of the EU, the countries, come together to form this group, this larger group. And they hold the power, but they give some power to this federal entity, this entity above them, to kind of control what is given to it and how it can work. They're independent along the bottom lines. They are independent, they make it, but they come together to form this confederation, this federal government, to watch over and help them govern. Again, the example of the EU works because it makes sense to people. You can see it. What do? Well, it helps with travel. It helps with trade. There's a number of things. A common currency can be set up, and it can work pretty well. But the local governments have all the power, and they're the ones who came together to form that group, and they gave the power to the central government, which can be taken at any time. And then federalism. Federal centralized government. This is how they share it. Centralized government, local governments, they share the powers. United States, again, we will talk about this. We'll go through federalism. We have a whole day dedicated, or 2 days, I think, dedicated to federalism. But the U.S. is a good example. You have the state governments and you have the federal government. And within those spheres, they both have the power. You can think of this as a Venn diagram. That you have over here, you have your state power. Over here, you have your federal power. And in this middle in the Venn diagram, there's the shared powers, taxation, laws, things like this are all considered to be shared, but they both work within this system. We'll get into this again a little bit later. As always, if you have any questions, please shoot me an email. Let me know how I can help. Hope you found this somewhat informative and somewhat bearable. All right, take care. Hope to see you soon.